Hi, my name is Marge Hartfel, and I'm a volunteer at the Earl E. Bakken Medical Devices Center. Prior to this, I worked at 3M, a multinational corporation with a reputation for innovation in multiple markets. I worked in 3M's healthcare business, leading cross-functional teams, developing and launching new products into the marketplace. My experience with quality systems and quality management comes from having lived all parts of it as we developed our new medical device products. I'm sharing this presentation with my colleague, Paul Rothweiler, who will jump in for the second half of this topic and introduce himself.
My name is Paul Rothweiler. I'm on staff at the Earl E. Bakken Medical Device Center, where I teach product development to the undergrads, graduates, fellows, clinicians, and lead professional development classes for working students and company executives. In my role as the lead of the MedWorks team, we work with clinicians and companies to convert needs into robust technical solutions, which include neurotechnology devices. Like Marge, I also spent over 30 years in industry working for a Fortune 500 company, a reasonably sized technical consulting firm, and a startup. I have worked on the bench, managed global regulatory programs, led organizational design teams, set standards for global technical teams, developed IP management programs, held the position of Vice President of Technology Development, Vice President of Sales and Marketing, and Chief Operations Officer. I too have been actively involved in numerous quality committees throughout my career, and when it came time in my career to perform a leadership role, I continued my involvement because quality systems provide leaders the tools to ensure they have a vibrant company and satisfied customers.
This course will cover what quality system regulations are for medical devices and what your role is in assuring that the regulations are adhered to and that you have done all you can to launch safe and effective products. As an inventor or innovator, you have a very important role to play, and this presentation will walk you through just what that is. The U.S. quality system regulations for medical devices were put in place by the FDA in the late 1970s, with the section on design control added in the early 1990s. These regulations require documentation of every step in the life of your product, including invention, innovation, and design. These regulations don't tell you what to do. Rather, they provide a framework that any manufacturer must follow in order to put a medical device into the marketplace, from the simplest to the most complex. However, the breadth, depth, and rigor of the application of these regulations may vary. You might ask, where do I fit into this? As a product inventor and developer, you are creating something of value. That is the concept, the prototype, the design you invent. There's something else, however, that is of value: the specifics and the information describing your work. For you see, if you want to see your invention in the marketplace, either by licensing your intellectual property for someone else to bring to market, or by seeing it through manufacturer and launch yourself, you must have this documentation in place. The FDA requires it. Here's the thing, and this is key. Your offer to a company who wishes to manufacture and launch your product will be a lot more valuable if you can say that not only do you have a novel device, but you also have all of the required documentation that goes along with it. Before we go too much further, 21 CFR 820 is the U.S. set of regulations. CFR stands for Code of Federal Regulations. Its partner internationally is through the ISO organization and is called ISO 13485. ISO stands for International Standards Organization. As the name implies, it's an international, non-governmental organization that develops market-relevant standards across a variety of industries. Good news for us, there's not much difference between the two sets of standards. Think Coke versus Pepsi. If your product is only ever going to be sold in the U.S., there's no need to pay attention to ISO 13485. But if it might be sold anywhere outside the U.S., 13485 comes into play. There's an active effort underway by the FDA to harmonize 21 CFR 820 with ISO 13485, making quality management easier for us all. Stay tuned. Both 21 CFR 820 and ISO 13485 cover activities from organizing your operations through design, manufacture, and post-launch tracking. You can see the 14 sections here. The first three bulleted items here relate to organizing your operation to comply with the regulations. The last three bullets relate to post-launch tracking and guidance and use of statistics. For now, you needn't have concern for these. The bulk of these requirements, however, focus on the design and manufacturing of the product itself. Again, every company that puts a medical device into the marketplace must follow these requirements. However, each company will have their own flavor. This is how these systems work, from the FDA to you. 21 CFR 820 tells you that something must be done. For example, design input, and I'm quoting here, each manufacturer shall establish and maintain procedures to ensure that the design requirements relating to a device are appropriate and address the intended use of the device, including the needs of the user and the patient, end quote. Okay, so each manufacturer shall establish and maintain procedures. Companies write these procedures, and they're called SOPs, or Standard Operating Procedures. At 3M, for example, in our healthcare businesses, we had dozens of these, and that every new product program followed as they did their work. An SOP would say something like, all design input requirements will be included in the project's master design plan, or design input will establish the required tasks to validate the design. The plan will reference the necessary work instructions as needed to complete all the required tasks. Or, all design input requirements will be written in a clear and comprehensive manner. These SOPs will be accompanied by work instructions that detail exactly what you must do. They're pretty prescriptive. For example, if the SOP says design input will establish the required tasks to validate the design, you're likely to find a template or a spreadsheet that you must complete as part of your work, and that will be in the work instructions. So you're working in a world where there are regulations, SOPs, and work instructions. There's value in the documentation that you can provide a manufacturer or a licensee that will help them to meet their obligations in these SOPs. Just a quick note. Big companies like Boston Scientific, Medtronic, 3M will be certified for the full implementation of the FDA's and ISO's regulations. But it's also possible to be certified in only parts of the whole thing. As the second bullet points out, a startup may only be certified in design controls. There's no need for them to obtain certification from the FDA in anything more than that. But in order for a big company or a contract manufacturer to put a product into the marketplace, the full set of quality system regulations must be addressed and documented and maintained. As an inventor or innovator, or part of a team developing a new device, even as a student, where do you fit? Right here in this section called Design Controls. This Design Controls section says its purpose is to ensure that the design requirements relating to a device are appropriate and address the intended use of the device, including the needs of the user and the patient. This section is all about the upfront work, the user needs, the inventing, the prototyping, and the early testing. There are 9 subsections that tell us what must be done. And note that every one of those 14 quality system regulations that I listed on an earlier slide has its own subsections. There are 9 of them here. You can see design control includes activities from design and development planning, essentially the project's master plan, through design transfer, meaning transfer to manufacturing. It also includes something called a design history file, where the formal documentation of all of this work resides. Here's another look at the elements of the design control process, like a waterfall. Work flows from one step to the next in a logical order, starting with identifying user needs, turning those into requirements, also called design inputs. Then innovation, design, and development take place to meet those design inputs. There are feedback loops implicit in this diagram that allow for iteration. And there are also formal reviews that assure the team has done the work it said it would do. Let me mention, too, that the depth of the dive into each of these boxes is a function of the complexity and FDA class of the device. The amount of work and rigor for developing a neurological implant is very much more than it would be for a new first aid dressing. The rest of this talk will focus on the first three boxes: user needs, design input, and the design process. User needs. It all starts right here. And in the case of a new medical device development project, this is an activity that you are central to. I'm going to start very basic. Who is a user? The answer is quite broad. If we were in the classroom together, this is where I would look at you and ask for your input. But let me create a list. A user is a medical professional, such as a doctor or a nurse. A user is the customer and or the patient, a patient's caregiver and family. It could be a person in central supply who receives your device, stores it on a shelf, and sends it into an OR or a clinic or a patient's room. It also includes the company who might sterilize your product prior to use or after it's been used, if it's a reusable product. It's also the person who has responsibility for the disposal of your product. You've got to think about users very broadly and comprehensively. We just talked about who. Now let's talk about how. How do you find user needs? You talk to people. You talk to everyone in every setting. You spend time observing in a hospital or a clinic or a surgery or a home setting or anywhere your device might be used. You do research. You do internet searches. You do surveys in person or online. And you ask a lot of open-ended questions. Why do you do it that way? What do you learn when you're doing it? How did you learn that? What can go wrong? Why, and ask why again. And importantly, remember to write all this down. You'll see more about this in just a minute. I like this quote from Albert Einstein because for me, it highlights the extraordinary value of getting as much information as you possibly can prior to starting to work on a solution. The next step is to translate all those user needs into something called design inputs. You can see us moving down the waterfall over there on the right-hand side of the slide. From 21 CFR 820, design inputs are the physical and performance requirements of a device that are used as a basis for the design. Think about it this way. User needs are most often stated in qualitative terms, things like shorter, faster, more flexible, lasts longer, is shelf stable, and so on. You want as much of this kind of input as you can get. Your job now is to translate shorter into something that can be measured, like less than 4 inches. Faster into something like less than 5 minutes. More flexible into something like elastic modulus is less than 100 megapascals. Most importantly, write it all down. Write down your translations of the qualitative into the quantitative. Document it. This translating of user needs into design inputs is oftentimes a team or a small group exercise. It takes some thought, and it takes some time, and it takes some iteration. Some user needs might have more than one design input. For example, if a user said a device had to be handheld, you might have a design input relating to the length, the width, the height of the device. You might also have a second design input relating to its upper limit for weight. Look at it this way. What you're doing is creating the ceiling, the floor, the walls, the furniture of the space in which you're going to be doing your inventing and your innovating. Documenting user needs and design inputs is foundational to all the rest of new product development, yours and anyone else who's going to be part of it. And that includes quality, regulatory, clinical studies, marketing, sales, and manufacturing, especially manufacturing. Now I'm going to turn the rest of this topic over to my colleague, Paul Rothweiler.
Thank you, Marge. To explore what Marge has said, let's take a look at a simplified fictional example for a cardiac device. You can see in the table on this slide the user needs on the left. Those would be, let's say, a cardiac surgeon's needs that's going to use this device. There may be additional needs in the table that the team has contributed from their experience in building successful cardiac devices in the past. On the right side of the table are one or more design inputs paired up with each user need. As you can see and Marge mentioned earlier, The design inputs are starting to look like engineering measurements. Those of you with experience will chuckle at our simplified example. For a typical project, the user needs and design inputs will span over many pages. While you will make every effort to identify the right design inputs at this point in the process, the reality is that as you move through the process, you will learn things, and they will improve your insight, requiring a revision to your design inputs. Just remember to document the changes, the reason for the changes, and the data behind those. The next box we want to review in the waterfall diagram as we move along called design process. Now, most people would call the activities associated with this box as innovating. The reality is innovation occurs throughout the product development lifecycle as you work through the requirements of building a robust product and process to bring a solution to the market. Where many of us can get turned around is when we start with innovating before we understand the problem. When that happens, we sometimes end up trying to push a solution on a market that doesn't need one. However, more times than not, we understand the issues of a market well enough that innovation can occur without really trying. Regardless, before officially beginning the design phase, we would strongly recommend that you have performed and documented the user needs and design input processes. Remember when Marge said the design inputs provide the floor, ceiling, walls, and furniture for innovation? We need those boundaries to ensure our validation step that's going to come along produces a solution that meets our users' needs, and we complete the loop of the waterfall diagram. Some of you may think what I just said is constraining and will limit the potential of your innovation. For example, what if I come up with a really novel solution during the design process that doesn't match the user needs we originally documented? We're not saying that you wouldn't record those ideas. What we're saying is if a really novel concept is produced during the design phase or brainstorming, that you would take those through the user needs and design input processes to ensure that it's on track and your documentation will align with the new concept. Let's talk about the activities and the people involved in the design process. For a robust output, you will most likely need other people. You can innovate on your own, but you will only bring the knowledge you have to the problem. By bringing together a diverse team, the likelihood of the work product being more robust will increase. If this is your first time brainstorming, there are many books and tools available to aid your team. A critical item to remember is that when you are brainstorming, do not critique the ideas while your team is brainstorming. The goal is to create as many ideas as you can. Filtering the better from the not so good will happen later. The simplest tools for brainstorming are a piece of paper and a pencil. While brainstorming can feel like matter being created out of nothing, the important step of this process is to capture the good and the bad ideas. A simple way to do this is to take a picture of the drawings and include them in your design history file, which Marge mentioned earlier, and we'll discuss in greater detail in just a bit. After your brainstorming session is over, then you and your team can filter the ideas against the design inputs to reduce the number of ideas you will further process. There are many tools to facilitate the filtering process. One of the easiest is called an affinity map. When you have a list of ideas from the brainstorming and filtering that look plausible, we would recommend that you also make inexpensive builds of your concept to test and give yourself a better perspective of how the ideas might work. This can include constructing objects that look like your idea and process diagrams of how you think the users will use the idea. You may even try to develop a process diagram of how the idea would be produced and distributed. Then repeat the brainstorming process with your new insights. All of this will help you identify which ideas will bring the greatest benefit to the user and your future company. As you gain confidence in your idea, we would recommend making prototypes that begin to resemble the product you hope to produce. Test them. Make them again to make sure they're repeatable. At this point, we'd like to point out that using a design of experiments, or DOE, is a good way to ensure you invest wisely in the development of your idea. If you're unfamiliar with DOEs, there are a number of books and online materials available to guide you. To evaluate your prototypes, we'd also recommend becoming familiar with ASTM or DIN test methods. There is no reason for you to invest time in developing a new test method to measure your prototype unless absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, you may have to pay to get a copy of a relevant ASTM or DIN test method, but the costs will be less than those associated with inventing a new method. During the design process, we encourage you to build and test your concepts, to learn as much as you can about what works and what doesn't work, to document everything, because in the next box of the waterfall diagram, we are going to distill those learnings into what we call design outputs. Like all the boxes, this is another critically important element of design control, but it is the one that anyone looking to license or manufacture your new invention is going to look at right away. And your outputs must line up with the design inputs and user needs, as you will see on the next slide. Design outputs include all of your brainstorming documentation and things like parts drawing, formulations, material specifications, assembly processes, test methods, target values, along with minimum and maximum test values, and every other detail that would make it possible for someone to produce your future product. Here's what the document might look like for a fictional example of a cardiac device. You can see that easy to advance through the vessels, a user need coming from a clinician, led the team to specify candidate materials and a performance characteristic. The design output is then going to include exactly what material was finally selected and exactly what minimum intravascular pressure was able to be obtained. Every box in the right-hand column will be filled in when you're finished with your inventing and experimenting. So let's review how we got here. We collected user needs, as many as we could. We translated them into design inputs. We did some brainstorming, inventing, filtering, experimenting, and testing. And from that, we created design outputs, all along the way verifying our work product against the design inputs. Sometimes the process from user needs to design outputs can take a few months, or it can take years. The duration depends on many factors. Let's take a moment to revisit a message buried within the previous slides. Included in the design control process waterfall are two boxes called verification and validation. Companies often refer to these as V and V, although they're very different from each other. Verification is reviewing and documenting what is done by the team to assure that everything in each design output box matches up with what's in each design input box. There can't be any mismatches or omissions. Validation, on the other hand, is reviewing and documenting what is done by the team itself to assure that everything in the final medical device meets everything in the user needs box. Build the thing right and build the right thing. Up to now, we have talked about boxes in the waterfall diagram and suggested that following these steps will lead to the creation of a compliant and quality product. At this time, I'd like to take the conversation up a level and discuss the framework around the boxes. Between 1983 and 1989, 44% of the voluntary recalls were deemed to have been preventable if they had adequate design controls. So in 1990, the Safe Medical Device Act of 1990 authorized FDA to add design controls to the Good Manufacturing Practice, or CGMP, requirements for devices. What is a design control? Sometimes better known as 21 CFR 820.30, or 820 subpart C, which I'll paraphrase as, each manufacturer of any Class 2 and 3 and certain Class 1 devices listed in paragraph A2 shall establish and maintain procedures to control the design of the device in order to ensure that specified design requirements are met. We do that by following the boxes in the waterfall diagram. In addition to those items, design controls also include paragraph H, design transfer, to ensure that the device design is correctly translated into production specifications. Paragraph I, design changes, to verify, review, and approve design changes before they're implemented. And of course, paragraph J, design history file, often referred to as DHF. Earlier, Marge suggested that a good name for this section is write it down. The design history file, or better known as the DHF, is where we keep references to records that demonstrate the design and execution was performed in accordance with the design plan and quality system requirements. If this is your first time, you may wonder, what is in a DHF? Many of the specific items have already been discussed previously that build your DHF, like user interviews, decisions made, test methods, development, and of course the data. When in doubt, it's very simple to include a reference to something in the DHF. As mentioned, the DHF's regulatory purpose is to demonstrate the product was developed well and complied with the regulations. But the DHF also serves to document the knowledge obtained by the project team for future projects and staff. Some of you may have noticed the language saying, it's required for finished devices. And you may think, well, my device isn't finished. Valid point. Despite that, I would recommend that you assume that you will succeed and start capturing it in real time. Because if you don't capture it while it's created, you will find it very difficult to find the information after the fact, particularly if your team members change over time. Not enough can be said about having a robust DHF at the time when the company changes ownership, whether it's adding investors or being acquired by another company. You will eliminate a large portion of the product's value if you don't have one. Let's pause for a moment to recognize that your quality system will also have other documentation like a device master record, or DMR, and a device history record, DHR. The DMR is a compilation of records containing the procedures and specifications for a device. Remember when Marge talked about converting user needs into specifications? A DHR is a compilation of records containing the production history of a finished device. The DMR and DHR, along with other requirements in 21 CFR 820 and ISO 13485, are not in scope for this talk, because at this point, you're most likely at the point in your journey where you don't have a production history. But you will see mention of them during other sessions of this course. For example, in module number 6, Kip Ludwig talks about the record-keeping requirements related to performing clinical studies with your device. We see in the slide the regulatory framework that Kip referred to in his talk. If you're like me, you get really excited about developing new ideas and can't wait till they're finished. And I'd argue enthusiasm is a good thing. However, to avoid getting to the end of an expensive build and test or gate review and discover the flaws, ask yourself along the way, what and how could things go wrong in an unintended direction? The same creativity and time used to resolve issues is the same talent required to challenge the assumption everything will proceed without incident. Imagine how happy you will be if you avoid a possible flaw before too much time and money are spent. Make sure you include these reviews as you build your project plan and strongly encourage your team to share their concerns the moment they identify them. The earlier you are aware, the more you can do to address them. And not all flaws are equal. Some flaws may fit in the category of not originally intended, but they don't detract from the concept. Some could result in significant effects to the concept's performance and potentially the intended patient population. We also need to be aware of how difficult it is to detect the flaw. Flaws that are hard to detect can be difficult and expensive to prevent and resolve. There are several tools you can use to guide your team through risk identification. The most common is a failure modes effects analysis, or FMEA. The simplest is the 5 whys. Please also remember, other speakers in this course have recommended looking at documentation of similar devices at FDA's website to assist in identifying potential issues. Once you have identified the potential risks, then it's time to identify how to prevent and control the risks. Your solution may involve a number of items working together, such as measurement and communication plans. At the beginning of your journey, you collected pain points as needs that you wanted to address. The last thing you want to do is to unintentionally create a different pain point for the user. During your journey, you collected a lot of information that will inform you on how users would like to use your device, along with potentials for how they might abuse your device. User may also have differing levels of training or the use of the device within different environments. It's not unusual for a treatment or procedure to start in a clinical setting with follow-on care provided outside the clinic. A common mistake is to try to understand human factors after your prototype has been built and then ask, how would you use this? A good design process will ask how the concept would be used and then make design decisions to fit the anticipated uses. The difference in material choices and product design based on the answers can be significant. To redesign the concept after learning how the user would actually use it can be costly. Remember, everyone on your team is capable of working on human factors and usability. A simple and price-effective tool within everyone's reach is to draw. Whether it's with a pencil or a software program. Draw the workflow, what the device looks like, and images of the users with your concept. The drawings don't need to be fancy, stick figures count. If you need a physical representation of your concept, then look for a block of wood or paper products that can be used to represent your concept. Thank you for listening. Before we go, let's take a moment to talk about why you really want to have a robust quality program. You may have first planned to address quality because the regulators required it, but there's more to it than that. First, your quality program is not a separate thing from developing your product or running your company. It's how you ensure your product and company will be successful and how you know that you will gain and keep your valuable customers. Your quality program describes the collective knowledge of the company. It is based on the best of your company's know-how and experience. To deviate from your best source of information can only lead to less than desirable results in product performance and user satisfaction. Your quality program needs to make sure your company always has the best and latest know-how. So your program needs to have a living process for it to be updated when new knowledge is learned. And everyone needs to be involved in building that knowledge. Occasionally you may hear a colleague say, the quality program is too burdensome, or an add-on to their job. Following the quality program should be their primary job. By following the existing quality program, then everyone knows how the work was done and what to do if problems arise. Then issues can be identified and resolved quickly. In the rare case where your quality procedures are overly burdensome, then work with the quality team to evaluate options. There's no harm in discussing your quality procedures on a regular basis. A living quality program is one that is frequently discussed and embraced by everyone. Another false impression is the quality department's program or operations. The reality is quality is a business program. If your company doesn't have a good quality program, then your products or service will suffer and your customers will seek out your competitors. Or worse, your product could cause harm to someone. In the end, your chances of receiving FDA approval, your chances of creating a profitable product, and your business's very existence rely on a good quality program. Marge and I want to wish you well on your future endeavors, and we hope this course has been beneficial to you. We thank you for listening and invite you to come back to this talk frequently as you move available in the reference slide and experts you can call upon as you travel your journey to developing quality technology, quality products, and a quality company. All the best.